thanks to the scienticians that have been at work on AI for the last couple of years, Al, we don't need to worry about grief anymore. And
yes, my last problem solved.
it's been holding the human species back for too long, and they've said it ends. This ends now, and I, for one, am very grateful to them for that. Now, what I'm referring to is a development that's kind of been cooking along for a little while now, but has, like a lot of AI technologies, is kind of reaching a singularity point, and that is the technology available, sometimes known as Griefbots, sometimes known as Postmortem avatars, which I like, sometimes known as Ghostbots or Deathbots. And what we're basically talking about is using large language models, and as loyal listeners and viewers will know, we sometimes have a segment on the show called Boy, That's a Large Language Model, and you can see this as part of that, as an installment of that regular segment, if you wish, using a large language model to replicate or mimic a deceased person for the benefit of whoever, loved ones of that person, family members, relatives, etc. And, I love tech, I love ethics and philosophy, and this is a real rich, interesting, potentially funny, potentially dark topic that I've been spending a little bit of time in the last few days reading about, and there's some great articles about it. There's some great sources kind of contemplating what it all means, and there's great examples of it coming to fruition in different markets. So, I guess the fundamental questions, as always with this sort of thing, are how far could it go and how far should it go? And it can go, and it is going kind of extremely weirdly far. Like 5 years ago, this was kind of the stuff of science fiction, and now, of course, it's very easy to replicate people's voices. It's very easy to imagine like a large language model scraping their digital footprint to get a sense of how they speak. And
I think a lot of people's entry point to this genre, a lot of people's sense of it will come from a Black Mirror episode that I myself have not seen. But there is a Black Mirror episode, I believe, where somebody recreates a dead loved one through the use of technology. And I think, and this would have come out, that episode predates ChatGPT, I believe. Okay. So that means that this thing that was put in front of people is now quickly becoming a reality. And I'm guessing, I'm hoping so much, I'm crossing all my fingers that you've got examples, because whenever I think of this stuff, I always think, this is the kind of thing John's going to say, we're almost there. But I love the idea there probably are some people that have, instead of going, no, that's too creepy, there are some people who've gone, nah, I'm doing it right now.
Yeah, there are some people. And one of the things I looked at was, so this thing called Deepbrain AI, which is working in South Korea. And initially what Deepbrain AI was doing was offering a service that kind of I guess that was kind of a preparatory or precautionary service. So if you had an older relative and you thought, we all want to remember Uncle Bobby when he kicks the bucket, so we'll get Uncle Bobby to go into the studio at Deepbrain AI, and they can, get some images of his face, they can take some recordings of his voice, and then they can create like a hyper-realistic version of him when he's gone for us all to enjoy. And so they were doing that for a while, but that was kind of, they said it was sort of not...
What an unusual request to be given by a family member. Will you go down to the Remembrance Centre, please, Bobby?
Exactly. But I'm only 42. Come on, just get, he's got a very poor lifestyle. We can't take any chances. And so they started off doing that. And they said, look, it's not really practical because people are, old and infirm, and they don't understand smartphones, let alone how to become Griefbots. That's just weirding oldies out. So that, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that was the vibe I got. Was like, this is too creepy. So instead, what they do is, which sounds kind of already a bit out of date, although this article I was looking at was only from earlier this year. It was like from March. They said they'll just get a photo of that person and kind of use AI to animate it, and then use AI to mimic that person's voice. And they might say something like, give you a touching farewell. And they had a very sad example of a mother and daughter where the mother was using that service. And I guess the article, it was an ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation article about, what does this all mean and blah, blah, blah. I mean, and then I read a kind of bioethicist's take on it, which was just fascinating because it was like, this is starting to be used, but are we thinking about, so many questions, and some of them are obvious, like, who gets to use it? Is it appropriate? Like, is it good for people to be doing this kind of thing or whatever? But also who gets to use it in terms of like, do you want to make these things available to adults only? That seems like a reasonable idea because like having a child interact with a Griefbot seems fraught, to say the least. But then also like, who can make a Griefbot? Like if I die and my like estranged ex-wife wants to have a relationship with my Postmortem avatar, can she, or like some weirdo at work that had a crush on me, can that person just like get Deepbrain AI to make a fucking Postmortem avatar of me to interact with? Like, I'm not okay with that. So there's these questions about consent.
I was just going to say, John, I love the idea that also, eventually a new market springs up where people who just never met you would like to meet your Griefbot. So there's like a website set up called like upvote your Griefbot, and you can just like upload Nana to an international database of Griefbots, and then just some weirdo in Cincinnati can just like go, oh, it looks like this grandma from Melbourne's getting a lot of upvotes this morning. Let me have a chat to her. And then just anybody on earth can just like click your Nana and have a chat with her. Hello, darling.
Well, that's partly what was coming up in these articles was like, what if, who owns it? Like if you're using Deepbrain AI or whoever it is, they presumably might have kind of intellectual property rights to this thing and what it can do and the algorithm that supports it and whatever. That might mean that they like could change it at any time. And we've previously talked on the show about kind of sexual chatbots or romantic chatbots, and Replica was one of the services doing that. And then everyone got pissed off because Replica changed the kind of algorithm, and apparently it made all the chatbots weird and asexual. And I mean, you can totally imagine, the algorithm changes and suddenly your dead Uncle Billy feels a bit like off and starts saying things that he would never have said. Or that just happens because, sometimes these things evolve in ways that are a little bit left of center. Maybe it scraped some weird shit from the internet. So it starts like talking to you about like curry recipes, and you're like, we never talked about this when you're alive.
Just imagine the feeling. I'm just. I tried for years to get you to talk about curry recipes.
You're allowing yourself to kind of suspend disbelief, but then if you get this kind of off shit, you're like, or you go, is this thing trying to sell me something? Like, that's fucked. I'm trying to relate to my dead grandma, and it's suddenly it's like, if you're feeling sad, you can try this online counseling service. And I'm like, oh no.
Say, but Nana, I already got a Squarespace website. Why are you talking to me like this?
Exactly. Why do you want to talk about me undies? That's not something you would ever discuss with me in real life.
Imagine how disconcerting it would be. Just I'm picturing the feeling of you've already had a relative who you're very close to die. You've gone, I want them to live on, and then and then your dead relative appears on the screen, and then you're, oh, they're back. This is so nice. And then a couple of weeks, they're exactly as you expect them to be.
Yeah.
Just imagine how disconcerting the feeling would be if then suddenly the next day they were like completely, they looked like your relative, but just started saying really out of character stuff.
Totally.
That feeling is just making my skin crawl.
Yeah. And you could, I mean, it's at the moment it's pretty good, but given that it couldn't have existed 5 years ago, in another 5 years, you will be able to get just a kind of experience that is very close to the real thing. And, you know, sometimes these bots take the form of text exchanges, so you can just like interact via WhatsApp or something. Sometimes it's more like a Zoom call, and you've got like a person on the other end. But eventually, I guess what they'll be doing is VR headsets, and you know, people will be able to interact
like VR chat.
Exactly.
Nana's in VR chat.
my Nana's stuck in the VR bowling alley for some reason, and she's dressed as a furry,
dressed as a sexy fox, but she's still my gran.
Exactly.
I love bowling with the sexy fox with her.
Whenever I find their grief overwhelming, I just go into the bowling alley and bowl with the sexy fox. Yeah, I mean, it made me think forward to, you know, like what's the final frontier? Like if you think about it, other people are really just experienced by us through our senses, obviously. So you can get to the point theoretically where you could interact with somebody. And I'm not talking about, you know, in the next couple of years. I'm talking about eventually. You can get to the point where you'll interact with somebody and it will be very close to what it would actually be like to interact with them. And then the only thing that's different is the knowledge that they are dead and you're talking to a simulation. So I guess the final frontier is just allowing Elon Musk to go into your brain and take out that little bit of your brain that tells you this is a simulation. Then you don't have to experience grief anymore. You're just one day interacting with your relative. The next day you're interacting with them and you're like, fucking, she's done pretty well. I think she must be like 140 years old. Oh, well.
I guess I must be the luckiest boy ever to have such an old grandma.
Exactly. Kind of weird that my 8-year-old son hasn't aged the whole time, but whatever, he's a good kid. And then I thought, well, if it gets pretty realistic and let's say my lover dies and I miss her and I don't just miss talking to her, what's that going to be like? Having grief sex.
You get the special package where Fleshlight does a collab with Griefbot app, and then
yes,
and then you get a Fleshlight. You get a Fleshlight device and a Griefbot flesh grief, and it's a collab of the century.
Exactly. I thought you were going to suggest some kind of casting that was made before someone passed away. That's too much. And yeah, then you kind of think, well, you know, there are some kind of bioethicists and others who are like trying to propose, which is an interesting idea. I mean, it's kind of probably unenforceable, but trying to propose essentially guidelines for like how responsible companies should be offering this technology. Do you want to like do it in a way that is prescribed by mental health professionals in certain circumstances, or do you want to kind of restrict it to immediate family, that kind of stuff? But of course, you know, I mean, it's just going to be available to whoever in reality, because everyone will have that technology. Yeah.
I feel like a job that is going to be safe from AI for the next few years, if anybody's a bit concerned about their job, I would say become an ethicist, because there's going to be so much work coming up for ethicists in the next few years, and
people
by its very nature, you cannot outsource it to AI. Like that kind of defeats the purpose of having an ethicist at the moment. You can't say, oh well, we'll ask the computer if it thinks that Griefbots are ethically
is this okay? And I would say, oh yeah, fucking, it's great.
Oh yeah, I can't believe you guys didn't do this sooner. What a bunch of idiots! Why haven't you done this yet?
It's true. People with philosophy degrees have Stephen Bradbury, people who have more conventional careers. They all thought, I'll be a doctor and a lawyer. No, robots are going to do that. But if you've read, your Peter Singer and your Rawls and your Socrates, you're good. You're in better shape.
This is going to be you. You're well positioned as a man with a B.Phil from the University of Oxford. Then you're the person.
You've been on my.
But I love I love the idea of you're just going to be real irresponsible with it. Just going to be a fat cat. It's just having cash. You're just gonna live in a mansion, and you're just going to have a direct line to like all the tech companies like Meta and X, and you're just going to be all fat, just being fat, smoking cigars, and you're going to have little minions coming to you going, John Maloney, the Congress have asked if you think it's ethical if AI bots, and you're just going to go, yeah, tell them it's absolutely fucking fine, and then just like light another cigar with your $100 bill.
Anything's ethical for the right price.
So I mean, presumably people are already experimenting. I mean, I always find that it always seems as though this stuff is at a frontier where people aren't using it yet. And if you were to say to me, "Would you do this?" and if I was to say to you, "Would you do this right now?" I would hope that I would say no, because the idea of me just doing that, I think, is very worrying. But it's for some reason I always find like these news stories. It's always like China or South Korea. It's always, or maybe Japan. They're always the places where you just go, do these guys just think about computers? That's every time I see a documentary about South Korea, and they just show those like gaming lab halls where everybody just plays StarCraft in a room full of like 10,000 people, and nobody's looking at each other. They're just in the StarCraft internet cafe. And I just go, is anybody going, hey guys, what are we doing here?
What are we doing? Shouldn't we be getting plastic surgery instead of sitting here on StarCraft? And they go, yeah, great idea. So that's, this company in South Korea, they said this service, which actually, I mean, it sounds like they're ripping people off, and they call it Rememory.
Oh, wow.
And they say AI animates a photo or video and mimics the person's voice to say a final farewell and comforting message. I mean, I could do that for you for free, to be honest. Like,
so this is almost like a virtual. So this is a kind of, is it like a one-off? So is it like an e-card that you get from Jib Jab with where
just like that? It's just a photo of that person with a little moving mouth going, "I love you, goodbye."
Like a 2006. Like flash animation of the company. You were my favorite. Done. Goodbye. There's like ragtime music playing in the background.
Yeah, exactly. It's just them like on a roller coaster. Like a Jib Jab video.
Just really, really poor cutout of their face, just with the only thing that moves is the mouth, and the mouth just moves to a pre-recorded song that they've made, like the grief song. You'd have one choice, the grief song.
The griefs. It just goes dun dun da 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 da. So, and they said they charge about $1,000 for that service, and they've got something like 30 to 40 inquiries per month, and about 20 to 30 of those converted into an actual production. And I guess that, one of the problems that you might think is a pretty real possibility is that people, when they're overwhelmed by grief, they're not very savvy consumers. So you can sell them a pretty crappy product and sort of feed them hopes that it's going to essentially placate their grief and don't know, maybe it will. I mean, there are people who say, there are therapists who've been interviewed in some of this material that say, yeah, look, if it's not something that they get overly reliant on, then it can actually be therapeutic, in the same way that sometimes when people are grieving, they'll be like, oh, I had a dream that someone came back, and they feel slightly comforted by that. But then they say, it can obviously prolong grief and it can complicate it. And I say, well, we just need to keep pushing forward, because eventually you'll be like, well, this isn't really grief anymore, because for all intents and purposes, that person is still here. From my perspective,
yeah,
of course,
good point.
Their body is dead, but I don't care. I'm not them. I just knew them as a bunch of sensory inputs into my brain. And if you can still give me that, then they've not died for me.
I just see you all. That'd be great if at a dinner party you just turn to everyone after a few glasses of red and just say, you're all just a bunch of sensory inputs to me.
Exactly.
And just cross your arms and just sit back and just all gruffly. Yeah. I don't care. You're just a bunch of sensory inputs to me.
You're not even my real friends.
It's funny. You're reminding me of we've been doing the podcast for so long now that there are technologies that we spoke about in the first, maybe 1/3 of the podcast, and I'm thinking specifically about the AI girlfriend replica that we really need to do a revisit deep dive to.
Totally.
Because when we spoke about replica, there was no GPT-3. I believe GPT-3 was the first model that they tacked on Chat GPT, so that you're able to suddenly use it like a normal chat, that the general public could interact with it in a pleasant, chatty user interface. Because when we did the replica story about people getting AI girlfriends, they were using the previous version of GPT to get this sort of clunky API that you had to, be a developer to understand. And now, obviously, we're many generations into. It's funny too, isn't it? How it's almost a little bit scary if you think about the fact that I think the Turing test was essentially meant to be that the Turing test was this moment that was going to be a watershed moment for humanity, where you wouldn't be able to distinguish a human from a robot.
Yeah,
and we seem to have just blasted past that without really anyone going, "Hey guys, no one can tell us it's a robot anymore." If you open ChatGPT, if you were to interact with a text interface on the internet and you thought that it was like, I reckon if OpenAI fed John Maloney prompts, like took all the data that it had on you and just fed it into its learning model, and then I like texted you on WhatsApp, and what was replying was OpenAI.
Yeah, I don't think
I would not like it would take.
You'd be like,
I'd go,
John's really on his game today. If anything, you'd be like, he seems somehow better. I've never heard John speak, so I didn't know John was so into Sam Altman. This is crazy. Why does he keep bringing him up in every conversation? Exactly. How he's a real great guy. Well, one of the things
did you know, sorry to keep jumping around. Yeah, go on. I was just going to say, sorry, last point. This is really important. Did you know, because I didn't know this, apparently Sam Altman's gay.
Oh, I didn't know that. No, he doesn't.
No, isn't that?
I don't know why. Like, he doesn't project that persona. He seems very kind of.
He doesn't project sass. He's not like a. He wouldn't win Drag Race, I'd say.
No, and he seems quite hetero. But there you go. That is an important
Does it say
point.
That? Have you found it?
That Sam Altman's gay. Sam Altman gay. I'm just trying to refute it. Yeah, there you go. He came out at 17 and he's been open about his sexuality since then, and he's married.
That's why the company's called OpenAI, because he's been open about being gay.
It used to be called Closet AI, and yeah. So I mean, like while you were talking, I was just thinking about the kind of potential for misuse of this technology, and we've touched on commercial misuse, but what about if I was to take, and you could do this with replica chatbots too, because people would form parasocial relationships with them. If you were like a ransomware guy in Russia, you could be like, I'm gonna steal your grandma's code, and so
totally,
and I'm only gonna give it back, and she won't remember anything that you've been talking about.
Like
and I'm
I'm gonna delete her personality.
I'm gonna send her back to you as a zombie or as like a highly sexualized chatbot, unless you give me this.
That would be.
I mean, you'd go straight to hell, obviously.
The highly sexualized thing would be even worse than killing her off. You'd just be like, please just kill her off. No, I'm gonna send her back, being real sexy. Please just kill grandma. I'm sorry, I don't have any more bitcoins. Please.
Release her on the dark web as a sexy grandma, unless you pay me $10,000. Oh man, I can't. I'm ashamed that I even thought of that.
Think about how emotionally powerful that is, because you would absolutely be. It would be like you were holding the actual person's real relative hostage.
Yeah, the thing that happened. I haven't seen the Black Mirror episode either, but I've read about it as part of my prep for this discussion. And the thing that I think happened in that, which is quite prescient, is that it's about this woman whose husband dies, and she basically does this. She gets a kind of AI version of him resurrected, but eventually she grows bored of that because it doesn't change in any way. And I guess in some respects you would find maybe either that it would change, but like not organically, not in the kind of complex, interesting ways that people change, because it wouldn't be having any experiences outside of your interactions with it. And it wouldn't kind of suddenly come to you saying, I did this or I did that. I guess it could simulate that. And then she just puts it in the attic and brings it out for special occasions. I mean, in that case, she's actually kind of created this like
Christmas
a kind of robot. Exactly. Yeah. Christmas will bring out your robot grandpa. But that does raise a question. Like if you were like, okay, I want to bring back my dead relative, and then after a year you were like, oh, I'm kind of all right, thanks, and then you're kind of over this now, and then they have like a kind of
jug of water on it. It's. I also like the idea. We haven't really talked about what the robot. Haven't really talked about like what the receptacle is, and I'm just picturing that you could sort of put it in a Roomba kind of thing, exactly. And it's just a little floor vacuum with your husband in it going around and around, and it's kind of interesting for a month. It's interesting. I love for a month,
Susan, and you're just like, yeah.
And then you just don't even bother getting water. You've just got like a cold cup of tea next to you, and just go, oh, and just lean down and pour it all in the motor.
Susan, no.
And then it does it, and then it just goes, whoa, that's some cold tea you're putting on me there. And then you just start heel stomping it like a cockroach, because it was. Oh no! Oh no! But that is true. Like, can you just? But another ethical landmine is like, oh, can you just kill off if you've made a commitment to this thing like you would a human? Are you then just allowed to? And what would that do to like? What would that do to like a teenager's brain? If in much the same way that teenagers' brains get fried because of the kind of shit that they get exposed to on their phone since they're an infant. Imagine if they just seen mum and dad just sort of kill off relatives that they had grown tired of. Like growing up, the kid would say, "Oh, my aunt Jessica used to Roomba around, but then Dad got kind of tired of her, so he just put her in the trash." And so,
exactly. She brought up some slightly sensitive family issue, and he just put her in the trash. I mean, it would be like a kind of weird second death, and maybe people would then say like,
double
okay,
grief.
we brought back robot grandma, and now we're gonna give her a final farewell, and I don't know, shoot her out of a cannon or whatever. But yeah,
it might also be. I'm imagining, Americans and Brits always complaining about their families at Christmas, and I'm imagining like you'd bring them out for just 1 day, 1 or 2 days a year. That could be. I mean, the other thing people might start doing is just killing off the real grandpa so that they can have them for 1 or 2 days a year. Just like go, oh, can I be asked with this person every day of the year? So I'll send them to the memory recording clinic, and we'll get a copy of them.
Totally.
And I'll just do away with the flesh and blood version, and then we'll just pull them out when we feel like it. Put them back in the closet.
I mean, could it conceivably make their life less valuable in that way? If you go like, well, they're old and their best years are behind them, and we'll still have the Griefbot, so it's not that big a deal. Like, we'll still be able to talk to them in a way.
The Griefbot doesn't need end of life care. It doesn't need any of the troubles that come with having to care for an elderly relative, the expense of putting them in a care facility or having to worry about them or visits to the hospital or stuff like that. So you just
Well, what if
it's great they just get to 60 and then they kind of go, oh, like bloody hell, somebody left a toy on the ground and I tripped and fell on it, and now I'm legs bloody sore. And then the family's just kind of going, oh yeah, little falling over there, a little bit sore, are you? Yeah. And they go, don't you bloody dare. Don't you bloody dare.
Time for the old grief. They go,
I know what you're thinking, don't you bloody dare.
It's a while since you came up with a fresh topic of conversation, Grandpa. Like, pretty sure that you're just kind of running on the same algorithms anyway, so why don't we just fucking sort this out? Or what if you found out you had a Griefbot, and then you found out that the person who was a Griefbot of was still alive, but your family just couldn't be fucked dealing with them anymore. So you just had a virtual version that you could bring out for 1 day a year, and then you were like, well, yeah, should we contact
what if, like,
Uncle so and so? Nah, let's just turn the Griefbot on.
Yeah, or what about if you had like a dad who went out for a pack of cigarettes and never came home, and Mum said, "Oh, he's died, but it's fine. I got you like the Griefbot dad," and then he showed up like years later, and you'd been having a relationship with Griefbot dad. Yeah, and unbeknownst to you, he was the actual guy was alive, and now you have these two versions that have lived separate lives and have had different experiences.
That's a great premise. And then maybe the real dad and his Griefbot fall in love. That'd be my ending.
I'm gonna write that to Charlie Brooker, who's the writer of Black Mirror, and say, guy. Charlie, you're missing a trick. Here's what happens: Dad goes out for a pack of cigarettes, leaves the family. Mum tells everyone he's dead. Kid gets Griefbot, and then the question when Dad comes back and says, "Don't you love me, son?" and the kid doesn't recognize the dad because it's had a sort of weird robot dad for its life.
Yeah, who's probably got a few imperfections ironed out of him, as opposed to the real dad, who's a little bit less reliable.
John, I was going to say
I always kind of feel a bit surprised when I remember that he's the Black Mirror guy, because I remember back in the day,
isn't it crazy,
when he just used to write kind of acerbic film and video game reviews.
You had we knew him from when I first moved to London, 2011. That's when Weekly Wipe was at its peak. I believe it was around that time, and I loved it because so for anyone who doesn't know, Charlie Brooker, who's the creator or maybe co-creator of Black Mirror, who doesn't appear in the show, he was famous before Black Mirror for being a acerbic television comedian in the UK, and he had this show called Weekly Wipe, which was a wrap up of that week's news events and clips on YouTube and stuff. And he would sit. It was a funny sort of conceit. He would sit. That's the right word, yeah, John. Is the like I'd use? I'd say so. He would sit in his. The show would start, and he would be sitting in a set that looked like his living room, but it was sort of darkly lit. And he'd be kind of if I remember this correctly, he's kind of watching TV, and then they bring up on the TV screen what he's watching on the TV, and then he sort of looks at the TV while the camera is looking it's not looking directly at him, and he sort of talks at the TV and maybe a little bit at the camera about what he's seeing. So they'll play a clip of like Charlie bit my finger.
Yeah, okay.
And then he'll go, oh, it looks a bit like must have bit that pretty hard, and then it cuts back to the TV show. I mean, I'm doing it a disservice. It was funny. I thought it was great. I loved that show.
Yeah, I just remember finding his articles really funny because he used to just do these like
really he used to read his stuff.
Yeah, he used to do these scathing kind of film reviews or just commentary, and he had this he was just very witty and very kind of a little bit edgy. So there you go. Now he's gone on to predict the dark, hellish future that we've found ourselves in a few years after his ideas have come about. Is that still going? Black Mirror? I've stopped watching it.
The next. So it hasn't been on for a few years, and the next season has just come out. I was talking with some people about it yesterday, and I was explaining to them that Charlie Brooker used to be a television comedy guy, and they couldn't. First of all, they didn't really know who'd written the show,
right?
And I said, "Oh, it was this guy," and you wouldn't. If I showed you Weekly Wipe, you would just be like, "What? This guy like made Black Mirror?" Because Black Mirror is like darkly comedic, but it's nothing like There's nothing like Weekly Wipe, and of course,
no.
And then I explained to them, and I said, and because lots of people do know her now. In fact, the people that I was on the train with did know this. I said, and that show on Netflix called Philomena Kunk Rules the World or whatever, and everybody goes, oh yeah, Philomena, that's so funny. She like pretends that she's dumb when she interviews the scientists. And I said, Kunk on Earth, yeah. And I said, that's from a segment on Weekly Wipe. Charlie Brooker used to say, he had two characters that he would throw to. One of them was Philomena Kunk. The other one was a guy called Barry Shitpeas. He'd say, let me ask Barry. Let's see what Barry Shitpeas thought about that. And then they would cut to you would know. And there's a bald guy and go, I was fucking like in a pub, and a guy came up to me and said, oh, he's watching this YouTube on his phone. I said, mate, you can't be fucking doing that. And that was Barry Shitpeas.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the other one is he'd throw to Philomena Kunk, and he'd go, let's see what Philomena Kunk says. And then it would go, I was watching the Olympics and there were gymnasts up there, and I thought,
I remember right
what
now.
you bloody doing? Yeah. And that's how Philomena Kunk was born.
Yeah, that didn't trigger the association when I saw. I mean, I haven't really watched much of Kunk on Earth because you told me that the guests are all in on the joke, and then I thought, well, there's no point in watching this now.
They are in on the joke. They know
it claims to be making people uncomfortable, but they're not uncomfortable at all.
John, it would be remiss of me not to mention, for a little bit last of the episode, we could do a whole episode of this. Maybe we even will next week. In fact, I'm going to table this for next week because it's just going to take a little bit of work, but it's going to be perfect. YouTube turns 20 this week.
Oh, wow. Got 2005 is the beginning of YouTube.
Must be, yeah. So there's a bunch of news articles that have been written. So if you want to feel old yet, everybody, if you remember when you first discovered YouTube, and I certainly remember being very much an adult when I discovered YouTube. So yeah, so now we've reached a point where you can say, wow, YouTube. I mean, imagine a 20-year-old kid born the same year as YouTube. That's a human adult for 2 years, and they were born. YouTube was always in their life as soon as they came out of the womb. There's probably a YouTube clip, a pixelated YouTube clip of them coming out of their parent, and now here they are. It definitely would be. There's definitely like home water birth videos of people that are 20 now on YouTube. But I was thinking, perhaps next week we could do a I don't know how long it would take us to figure some of them out, but maybe we could try and do a John and Al's favorite YouTube videos of all time. Because what we could do honestly is we could just go through the articles that have been written this week, and we could because it'll be like, I'm sure there's loads of like top 10, like top 20, top 100 YouTube videos of all time lists.
Yeah.
And we can go through some of our faves. I know John's number one, Tay Chocolate Rain.
I do love Tay Chocolate Rain. Just so hard to understand. My favorite is that one, and just a spoiler alert, I'll have others next week, but my other favorite is the poor guy who spearheaded the Joseph Kony 2012 campaign.
Oh yeah, we should definitely do that.
And then he did bath salts and went out onto the streets of LA completely naked and was just blathering to himself, and somebody filmed it, put it on YouTube, and it's interesting.
My favorite is the live cross to the news reporter on location crushing the grapes for wine.
I still sometimes think about that and cringe, because it's like, it's such an awful sensation, and you can hear it.
Anybody that doesn't know, one of the most popular, famous YouTube videos of all time, if you just go to YouTube and you put in news reporter hurts herself, grapes, that you're gonna have and then live on air. It's a classic. They recreated it in Family Guy because it was such a viral moment. But if John's up for it, I haven't run this past him officially, guys. He might hate this idea, and he's
get off there,
the video's going to end, and he's going
to go,
don't you fucking put me on the spot again like that.
That sounds good.
Beautiful. Well, John, do you want to take us out of the show?
I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for joining us on this week's episode of Don't Praise the Machine, where we've covered the spooky world of Postmortem avatars. One day you'll be listening to this episode, to an episode of Don't Praise the Machine, and you'll find out that one or both of us is a Postmortem episode, but hopefully...
It'd be great if it was one. It'd be great if it was just one, and the other one's just like, well, I can't let this cash cow go.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to have to cancel the Patreon.
You no longer have to you don't have to find no longer do you have to find an actress who looks like Avril Lavigne to keep that cash cow coming in. You can just griefbot her.
Exactly. Or Paul McCartney, or whoever it was that's meant to have died. All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us on this particular deep dive, and you've already got a sneak preview of next week's episode, and boy does it sound great, and we can't wait to see you next week
at the podcast store.